active, and as you can see, many flashes going through and confirmations of many of them applying for a banking license. Ashwin Parekh of Ernst & Young joins in to talk about that. Ashwin, hi. So 19 applicants so far. Just to get some of the moving parts in place first, how long do you think this entire process is going to take? And realistically, what is the chance of the Reserve Bank clearing more than a handful of them? I mean, how many do you think will make it the whole way?
Well, I must say that after the February guidelines and particularly after the June 3 clarifications on the queries that people raised, it is becoming increasingly evident that the number of applications which we thought would be in the region of about 100 or 150, that's come down. I mean, you cannot be expecting more than 35, 40, at the most 45 applications to begin with by the end of today. NBFC sector, I mean, looked very, very sort of hot till about, or very encouraging till about the guidelines came out. 2 or 3 issues raised by the guidelines have reduced, in fact, the excitement around the NBFC sector. Structure is of course a smaller, but more importantly the conversion is a major factor. Answering your question, I can't see, I mean, after the guidelines and after the clarifications, I can't see more than 3 to 4 or 5 successful candidates at the end of this process. The process might take another 6 months to complete,
How painful do you think that process of winding up large and performing NBFC businesses is going to be for some of these companies, Ashwin, as they make the transition into a bank? I mean, how onerous a task do you think that is for them?
It is substantially onerous. It is substantially onerous on account of mainly the fact that there are 2 parts to the pain. First is the duration part. That is, how much are you really in a position to take your portfolio, the NBFC profit-making portfolio, into the bank, over the period of time which the RBI is now, I mean, the guidelines are now requiring. So that's one part of the pain. The second part of the pain, which is the real pain, is that if you're required to meet with the CRR, SLR and PSL may not be as harsh on NBFCs. I'm not talking of infrastructure NBFCs for the time being. I'm talking of the other NBFCs who have retail segments and who have also been serving MSMEs. I mean, for them it may not be very painful, but CRR, SLR will be. In which case, let's say the amount of deposits they may be able to garner in a period of about 3 to 4 years may not be adequate, to really bring in that portfolio and relieve the other liability which they may have picked up at a higher cost. So the whole argument of NBFCs getting into banking, which was low cost deposits, the CASA deposits, that actually gets completely nullified on account of the fact that that conversion has to happen within 2 years, 6 months of the process and 18 months after the in-principle approval is received. So it does become very, very painful. The expense perhaps for very successful, I mean, any NBFC who's above 30,000 crores is going to find it extremely expensive to convert it into a banking company, I should maintain,
Let's talk about a few faces that seem to be in pole position for getting that license to Ashwin. Faces like L&T Finance Holdings, like IDFC that finally did bite the bullet and actually apply for a license. Do they at this point meet most of the fit and proper guidelines that have been set out by the Reserve Bank?
Yes, see, fit and proper, I mean, what is that is a matter of evaluation. I mean, and regulators' evaluation. It's nobody else's prerogative. The regulator has to decide. My submission is very simple. If the regulator wants stable, I mean, a financially stable as well as a viable financial service, I mean, a banking sector, I mean, that's on one side of the story. The second is if it gradually wants to reduce the NBFC play in the sector, then in that case, all the names that you mentioned are extremely respectful, from the name of in terms of governance, in terms of their experience, in terms of even the way they have managed their operations in a very frugal manner, in a very cost-effective manner. A good part of their borrowings are long liability which they raise at a higher cost than CASA, but they manage their portfolio so very well. So those are the factors. If the regulator were to consider those factors, then these names have very good chance. I mean, they are the most respected names, that you could ever think about. But on the other hand, if you look at the issue of conversion, because they are all large-sized organizations, for them to convert into a banking company with all the guidelines, requirements and the clarifications which has been rendered, it's going to be really difficult, I should say.
There were some dark horses as well, Ashwin. Videocon, for instance, that admitted they were looking to apply for a license and may even look at tying up with an MNC bank in order to do that. How favorably do you think the Reserve Bank would look at something like that? I mean, an industry or a corporate that has no real history or leaning towards banking but is willing to tie up with an MNC bank that may actually have much deeper roots with regards to banking.
Well, basically the whole issue will come down finally to, not just this particular name that you mentioned, but for each and every person who's applying, he will have a valid story. I'm very convinced that he will have a very proper, very convincing, kind of a plan to put forth before the regulator. Now, there are 2 or 3 issues. One is the regulator cannot really create so many banks all at the same time. And the reason is very simple. If he were to do so, then he will have to really monitor these banks so closely. I mean, any new bank, I mean, the history says, not just in India, but anywhere else, till it is really performing for the first 6, 7, 8 years, it can be susceptible to, it can be prone to any kind of economic cycle, any kind of 1 or 2 bad accounts or a few bad accounts coming up all at the same time. These things have to be observed. The regulator has to be very mindful of that. I mean, you cannot really you have to protect deposit holders' interest. In such a situation, if the number of, licenses will be 4 or 5, then these many applications may not go through actually.
There have been some, Ashwin, that have taken the call not to go ahead and apply for that license, something like M&M Financial, for instance. Do you think the turf changes significantly for some of these NBFCs, or if they have had and enjoyed a well-entrenched business, in the key categories they function in, they should not face too much pressure on their business performance?
See, this is exactly the point. I mean, I'm really glad, the NBFC sector, the entire NBFC sector, when it read the guidelines and the clarifications, was really at pain, to understand what exactly is going on in the regulator's mind. M&A perhaps took a very bold step. The board took a very bold approach, recognized that there was far too much of a pain to be taken, expenses to be incurred to make it a bank, compared to the benefit that it would receive, as a bank. So, I mean, perhaps the kind of portfolio they had, the kind of, let's say, approach that they have to the NBFC may have really resulted in that. The other NBFCs have gone ahead and applied, but I can assure you, they also, in some form or the other, are expecting the regulator to consider, to really be a little more liberal in regards, and recognize that there is a substantial amount of pain involved in converting that successfully, a profitable, highly profitable NBFC into a bank organization with a medium to long-term expectations. I mean, how do you really answer your shareholders who are looking at some kind of a short to medium-term play as well, So it does become a little difficult, I would say.
Okay, Ashwin, we'll leave it there. Appreciate you joining in with your thoughts this morning. Many of these NBFCs likely to remain active today, last day for filing for that banking license. The market is doing okay.